Unfortunately, even if you look just at the language space, we are not all people of discerning means. Some of us are more affluent, others are struggling. And in fact, in this current economy, unfortunately, a lot of people watching probably share some kind of economic or financial difficulty. However, one thing that is not connected to an individual's wealth is our passion. And many of us are interested, in fact, if anything, intrigued by the idea of learning a new language, but how can you do it if you don't have a budget? Well, hopefully with this video, I'll be able to help you out. First and foremost, I would like to say this. Among many other disciplines and subjects, language learning is most likely the cheapest. Oftentimes, when we think about learning a language, we imagine frequenting or attending a course, going into a class, paying for expensive tutorship. And oftentimes this translates to having to live beyond our means and having to spend a lot of time because some schools can be really expensive. But the reality is that even though, yes, classrooms are great, these are all resources that absolutely can be used, they're not necessary. Repeat after me. They are not necessary. These are add-ons, but you can absolutely learn a language to fluency if you know what you're doing without spending a single dollar. Now, having established that languages are in fact one of those subjects that can be learned with the minimum amount of resource allocation as compared to many other subjects, it is important to underline that very much will depend on your current situation. Think about it. When you picked up your first language, it's not like you paid for it. You learned it for free. How did you learn it? Well, you learned it because in your family, you spoke that language, then you spoke it with your friends, you spoke it in whatever situation that you were in, and as you used it day in and day out, and you were immersed and surrounded by that language, you just picked it up. Now, given, in order for you to become proficient enough to get an important job, you have to go into education, and of course, just being native doesn't mean that you have the same vocabulary as a scientist or a philosopher. With that being said, oftentimes when people want to learn a language, first and foremost, they want to learn how to have a conversation with people. That's usually the first thing that people want. Now, there are a lot of other situations and scenarios in which you're picking a language because you want to build a career out of it. And in those situations, you will need certificates, you will need to be able to invest some money. But for this scenario, I would like to first focus on sort of a little bit of a scale, different layers, and we will begin from the cheapest possible. Now, there are some limitations to what you can reach, but if once again your goal is, now I just want to learn it because I love the language, I would love to be able to go to the country one day and just speak to people, and I want to be able to understand, I want to be able to watch movies and consume content in that language, understanding it without having to even touch a dictionary afterwards. Like, if you want to get to a point where you are conversational, pretty advanced, you absolutely can. The only thing you cannot do is to reach proficiency that would be necessary usually for a professional career. Although then again, fluency is also attainable with a minimum requirement of money spent, depending on your current situation. So let's have a look at that. Now, one of the easiest ways to be able to afford a language without spending money is to have people that surround you with whom you can practice the language that are native. So, classic one would be a girlfriend, a boyfriend, a husband, a wife. Unfortunately, however, sometimes people don't make use of that incredible treasure of an opportunity. In fact, what people do is that they just get lazy, including the spouse sometimes. So let's imagine that you are an Anglophone speaker, and then you have a spouse or a husband or a wife, and they speak French. You would love to learn French, but you end up, maybe you say a couple of words here and there, but in general, it's easier to communicate in English. You get lazy and you just speak English at home and in every opportunity. You can literally be with that person for 10 years and not learn a word. However, you also can become fluent with them, and that costs you nothing. Now, of course, they are not a teacher, so a teacher could help you, particularly if you have zero experience on how to learn a language, to optimize your gains, to overcome typical problems that just because someone is native doesn't mean that they can explain it to you, and definitely they can get you into a professional level. Even if at one point you do want to step into the professional training with classrooms and courses and books and teachers and tutors, one thing is starting from nothing, and one thing is starting from, well, I've already reached a conversational level, or at least an upper intermediate on my own without spending money. Now I'm going to progress even faster because I already have a foundation. Now, clearly, this is a great optimal scenario. Another one would be being able to live in that country. So if for whatever reason, for your job, for instance, you move to China and you really want to learn Chinese, it's a difficult language, but you live there, so you do have a lot of opportunities to practice, and hopefully you integrate. And once again, you have connections to people in your life that you see every day that are willing to help you and speak to you, and sometimes they have no other choice. In fact, the best foreigner with whom to practice their language is someone who doesn't speak you first. Those are golden, because there is no option. Like, sometimes it's nice if they know your language and they are willing not to use it, but still they can correct you or explain something, but still it is the best. I mean, my experience, every time I had to speak with people that knew no English, no Italian, nothing. So it was just me having to speak Japanese or me having to try and use Mandarin and just see what we can get out of it. That is the best. It can be frustrating, but if you keep doing it, it's just like going to the gym. Are you gonna get buff after a week? No, but if you keep doing it and you keep putting yourself into the situation, eventually it will happen. Eventually it will happen. But now let's talk a little bit about people who don't have this kind of connections. You don't know anyone who is a native speaker. You do not have those connections, and you do not live in the country that speaks the language that you're targeting. What do? Do you now have to invest a lot of money? Not necessarily. The first thing that I would like to mention is, of course, online free content. YouTube is a fantastic place where, as long as you are systematic and as long as you're committed and you just stick to it, there are a lot of, in fact, professional level courses and teachers that can really teach you in a way that is very similar to how it would be if you were attending a classroom. Now, given if you have a private tutor and you make a mistake, they can correct you. If you're watching a video and you misunderstand something, then that correction is not going to happen. Although then again, eventually you will have to test it. Then that is essential aspect of language learning. You got to speak. You have to speak with someone. And I will get to another location where we can find people to practice with. But in general, YouTube has a monumental amount of content that is just there for you to watch, and it's free. And a lot of it, I've seen it as a teacher. I am a former teacher, but maybe, I don't know, once a teacher, always a teacher is what I say. But yeah, I used to teach those courses that cost a lot of money. And sometimes I have to say that I see YouTubers that are professional teachers just as much as I am, and sometimes they're even better than me, depending. And they teach these lessons, and I'm like, this lesson is great. I mean, it's not like if you went to a paid course, you would get better value simply because you're paying. The only thing you're gaining is the attention of the teacher, and that's the only thing you're lacking in a YouTube video. But when it comes to the quality of the information, there are excellent courses and excellent teachers on YouTube that you can literally watch, consume their content, rewatch it multiple times, rewind it, take notes, practice it, speak out loud. Do not stop. This is one thing. Just stop this thing where you read. Okay, yeah, I reviewed the vocabulary. No, you didn't. You didn't say a word. You have to speak. It needs to, because you're building muscle memory. That's the reason. Simple as that. You cannot build muscle memory if you don't do it. It would be like taking a book about how to get biceps and you just read the theory. I'm glad you know all about how to gain muscle, but if you don't actually do it, and if you do not use the muscles, they will not grow, regardless of how much you can understand. And oftentimes we think that a lot of it's like memory. It is, but memory is ignited by repetition. You have to use the brain in the sense that you have to use those pathways, and then you have to use your mouth in order to speak the sounds and make them habitual to you, like something that you're used to say. And the only way to do that is repeating them out loud. And don't worry about making mistakes, by the way. I know that I mentioned that one of the problems with just watching YouTube videos is that you don't get corrected. So yeah, you might make a few mistakes, but who doesn't? Like, point one person that has never made a mistake as they're learning a foreign language. It doesn't exist. It's fine. And that's why I'm saying eventually you will have to speak to a native so that they can correct. Maybe you've learned something and then they tell you, no, that's not really how we say it. We say it like this instead. And then that's a great opportunity to learn, of course. But there will be plenty of other things that you will learn, such as vocabulary. And in general, if you repeat the sentences the way they're structured in videos, yeah, you're repeating them, but you're learning them from a native. So as long as you don't add too much in the early stages. As you become an intermediate student all the way up to upper intermediate, you can start build your own easily. And generally speaking, you will get a sense as to when something sounds wrong or right. But in the very early stages, I would suggest to stick to the way the teacher said it. And then, of course, if there is a noun that it's easily substitutable, so they are teaching you, I like drinking Fanta, and you can, non-sponsored, and you can of course switch Fanta with something else, it's fine. But then again, be careful with plural and singular depending on the language, and masculine and feminine if it's gendered. So there might be situations in which you could totally do it on your own. But then again, even if you make a mistake, it's not a big deal. It's okay, because at least you are trying and you're putting yourself out there. And it is through our mistakes that we in fact remember more easily, because it's an experience. And sometimes even if it's not a great experience in the world to make a mistake, it's totally fine, because you remember it, and therefore you will also remember the information connected to it. Okay, now that we have said this, fantastic. So you can watch your videos, make it into a habit. Like every night, 2 hours, I watch YouTube to study the language. Make it into a habit. You have to be strict with yourself. To be fair, if you don't do it daily, you will never become fluent. I will be straight with you. Yeah, of course you can take the day off, but why would you? Like if it's something you're doing for passion. I never took a day off when I was picking up English. I never took a day off when I was learning Japanese or Mandarin. I just enjoy it. I love it. It's part of my everyday. Yes, of course, there will be days that I have more time and I can be more intense, but there is always something going on. A new word, a new sound, I will watch something, and so that counts as practice. Studying is not only sitting at your desk writing down things on your notebook. That's one thing. In fact, not one of the most important. It's important, but not one of the most important. But even watching a little bit of a movie, or playing a game but switching it into the language, or maybe even, again, watching a video, all of this counts as studying. Everything counts as studying in the language world, as long as the language is activated, whether it be as a recipient or whether it be because you're actually trying to speak. Okay, so having said this, what's next? How do you find natives to practice with? Of course, making friends is great, and in today's world, even more so than it was when I was a child, you can, on the internet, you can find a lot of people that speak or that are natives of the language you want to speak with. But let's say that you are a little awkward, so you don't really know, you don't know anyone. Well, then there are websites where you can find that, specifically people that want to do what we usually in the language community call a tandem. A tandem is an opportunity between you and another student. Usually it's not a teacher at that point, but it's another student. They want to learn your language. You want to learn their language. And so you can have appointments like weekly. You could spend an hour together. The first 30 minutes, it's entirely in the language you want to learn. And so they will speak to you and you will practice and they will correct you and all of that. And then you switch. And then for the second 30 minutes, you're only going to speak your language, and then they get to practice. It's good. It's mutually beneficial. And they will come back, particularly if you're patient. And I would suggest you put them first and tell them, hey, let's do the first half an hour for you, so that they're excited, they're gaining something, they look forward to it. And then the last half an hour can be for you. I'm saying if you're having some trouble building that kind of connection, then be generous about it, be patient about it, be always willing, particularly in the first moments, to go out of your way to make it for a good experience for them. Show them that you are excited to learn their language, but also that you want them to practice with you, and share your compliments when they are saying something right. And if you do all of that right, you will create a little network. And now it doesn't have to be necessarily only with tandem students. That's one way to do it, but other times it can be also through online chat. Chat is not always the best, because again, it would be best for you to speak. I still suggest, however, even if you're chatting, read it out loud. Read what you typed. Doesn't matter if your neighbor thinks you're crazy or you're trying to summon a demon, who cares? Do that. And you should see when I try to practice my Latin. So you do that, and then when they speak back, and if you see a new word that you haven't seen before, pronounce it if you know how to pronounce it. Otherwise, ask them to record a little pronunciation if possible, or look for it, because again, pronunciation is something we can find online for free. Now, all of this can be done for free. What if you have a little bit of budget? Let's say that you do have a little bit, like you've got $100, $150, you've got that money. Well, what you can do, you can start using it to buy effective products. So maybe a $20 book here, $15 there, for a book that can really help you. You can spend 1 or 2 books that you think could help with the grammar, or they could help with pronunciation, or how to learn a language. You can invest a little bit of money, particularly if it's a book that do a little research first. YouTube channels, again, are great for that. And then when you find, yeah, this book is $20, but I really think it's worth it, for instance. Or you found a book it's $10. Yeah, why not? I mean, it's $10. So get a couple of books to help you. And then there are, of course, situations in which you could start paying for online lessons with private tutors, and you can find them as cheaply as $10. And oftentimes, the first lesson is free. So you get a free lesson, and then if you like it, you don't have to do it daily, because that's a lot of money. So in order to keep it low, you could do it weekly or bi-weekly. I would suggest to not do something like one lesson a month, because at that point it's kind of useless. Even once every 2 weeks as a way to review what you've done and practice it with them and actually speaking. If it's a $10 per hour lesson or a $15 per hour lesson, and there are a lot that are like this, some are even cheaper, then it's an investment of $20 per month. And then you do a one-time purchase for a couple of books that you think could help you. That's another maybe $20 to $30. It's $50. Is absolutely doable for a lot of people. Of course, if that's impossible for you right now, do keep in mind that once again, if you do all the things that I said before, even with zero budget, you can 100% get to a decent level, even if it's conversational, even if it's intermediate, and then you'll take it from there. It's also a good opportunity to test yourself. Am I really interested? Well, that's a good way to gauge interest and see if you stick to it. And then after you do, maybe you can start investing a little bit of money. Now, what about full-on courses that cost hundreds and hundreds of dollars? I usually don't suggest people to do it because there are so many resources online that unless you know that it's a course that would be so good for you and possibly also kind of take you to a certification, we'll get to that in a second, then I wouldn't suggest to spend a lot of money. You don't need to spend a lot of money. And in fact, I would suggest you keep on lower budget. Maybe you start buying a few more books. Maybe you start increasing those lessons that you pay $10 or $15 per hour. Maybe you could do it every week. That's better than spending hundreds and hundreds, if not like $1,000 for a course, because just because it costs so much, it does not mean that it's worth that much. And in fact, I would suggest keep a low budget, maybe around $100 a month if you can afford it, between lessons and books, and then save up the money you would have spent for the course and do 2 months or a 1 month holiday into the country after you have a basis to actually go and practice. I swear to you, that's going to be worth it 10 times more than the course that was going to overcharge you anyways. The only exception would be certifications. And I used to teach those courses. There are courses and classes that at the end of the class or at the end of the course, you will take the international certification exam. So something that you can actually use and add to your CV or resume to demonstrate in a business scenario or in a professional landscape that you do have that level in that language. It's certified. Every language has its own test. To prepare for these, while you can, by the way, prepare them on your own, if you don't know what you're doing, usually it's better to have someone guide you. Given you can study these on YouTube, and I myself am going to make a guide and a course that will be free for people to do that. So I will do that. However, yeah, sometimes if you're struggling with it, like you try it, but you keep failing and you feel like, no, if I actually went there, because then I can do a course where the teacher explains to me all the mechanics, that's fine. But once again, only if you either want it as a personal achievement, then totally fine, or if you want it for professional reasons. So it all really depends. The amount of money you're supposed to spend to learn a language is dependent on your goals and what you want to do. This was just a little brief introduction to the topic, but if you want me to go deeper into it and maybe bring in maths with the money, I'm more than happy to do it. But for now, thank you very much for joining Metatron's Academy, and good luck.